Ready?
Ready to
Okay.
go.
Welcome to the July meeting of the City of Forest Lake Airport Commission. Mr. Schmidt, would you take roll?
Yes, Mr. Ashbeck.
Present.
Mr. Dahlbeck.
Present.
Mr. Eigner.
Present.
Mr. Ship.
Here.
And Mr. Steeler.
Present.
All are present, sir.
Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion to approve with a couple of changes, please.
Okay, Mr. Ashbeck, those changes?
So on line 29, where it says motion to more, I believe it was meant to say motion to move.
Yes. So noted?
And line 69, or excuse me, 66, Dan Undum talked to Mike Tate. I believe it meant to be Dave Adams.
Thank you.
And then on line 79, I wanted to clarify that the FAA had contacted me and stated that the AIM manual was being updated to indicate the standard pattern altitude is 1,000 AGL. And because of that, they're removing the 1,000 AGL pattern altitude from 25 Delta in the airport directory. I just want to make sure it was clear that's what they indicated. With that, I made the motion with those corrections.
With those corrections, we have a motion. Does someone have a second?
I'll second.
And a second from Commissioner Eigner, Councilmember Eigner. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Minutes are approved, as noted. Number 3 on the agenda, Bolton and Mink. Silas is not here this evening. We have a memo from him, or a letter, I believe. Read through all of those, or?
I think the main one on there, I did have a conversation with Silas this morning, just to kind of get, what were the main points on the memo that he wanted to get presented. And I think the main topic that we discussed was the obstruction lighting project. If you recall back at the last, I believe it was the June meeting, MnDOT had authorized, or said, you have, grant funding for $10,000 for the project. After that meeting, or prior to that, I had a conversation with Silas and just said, where are we with an engineer's bid? Is that $10,000 going to be enough? Where are we looking at? He did go back and then actually start crunching the numbers and actually put together a scope of services for the obstruction lighting project. And if you look at what he presented, it's actually quite higher than the $10,000 that was originally put in for the CIP with MnDOT. So the original estimate was $10,000. When he came back for hardwired obstruction lighting, he came back at $25,000. So I asked him, is it possible to go back to MnDOT to see if they can adjust that grant, the grant award to account for, the additional cost due to the fact that the estimate that he presented now is different than what was originally done. He said that is a possibility, or the other option would be to go look at like the solar that had been discussed as well, the potential for putting solar in there, which he's confident would come under that $10,000 threshold. So at this point where it sits is that I did, after the last meeting when the commission provided direction that they wanted to proceed with the grant award, I did let MnDOT know that, yes, we're interested in pursuing that grant or that grant award for the $10,000. Again, making sure that we were able to, if the bid came back as it did, a lot significantly higher, we would be able to, if we can't find the additional funding to make up the difference, we could give that money back to the pool. Silas said he'll be able to reach out to MnDOT to see if they can adjust that award to account for the new proposal here. I guess it's just kind of, does the commission want to kind of proceed with that route? Again, he also wanted me to mention that the light poles are not in the penetration, so there's not a requirement to light them.
Right.
He said, however, there's a safety benefit to lighting them. So he was just kind of looking for some direction as to where the commission wants to go with this, since the numbers are different than what was originally presented back in June.
And still, even if we do get the increased funding from the state, the amount locally from the city would only be $2,500.
Correct.
And we'd have them hardwired into the lighting system, which is preferred over a solar system.
Yeah, and that'd be anticipated. I mean, granted, that number that the city, the commission share could difference between what the actual award is from MnDOT, but if you're using that 90-10 funding, funding mechanism that's been there in the past, you're right, $2,500 would be the commission's share of that project.
Any of the commissioners have any comments or thoughts? Mr. Ashbeck?
Mr. Chair, I had recommended that we pursue the hardwired so that all the lights come on at the same time, and you don't have to worry about a timing differential of a solar panel or one not coming on when the other lights are on. So I still think we should look towards that as the solution.
Anybody?
I have a question. Do all aircraft have the capability of lighting that?
Yeah, it's just through the radio frequency when you click your microphone.
Correct.
Yes.
But they would be on regardless whether there's an airplane.
I believe that,
They'd be on dimmer. Wouldn't they brighten up when you click? Is that?
I don't remember Silas speaking of that, but they would be on when our other landing lights are on.
Okay.
And I would assume at least the intensity of our runway landing, runway side lights.
Right.
But it would be a great idea if they did ratchet up some too.
As long as we're not going to lose the 10,000 out there, I would say we'd want to sit tight and try and push for the additional to get the better system.
I guess then just the follow-up question to that is that if MnDOT says, no, we don't have any increased funding, for that, the difference, do we want to pursue a bid for the solar on there? Which would
I would
probably.
say yes.
Well, our options would be to either pursue solar this year or wait for a request for funding in a future year, so.
Yeah, I would, yes.
The other question I would have, are there other projects that you feel would be a greater need? Seeing as this is not mandatory, you don't have to have this. Are there other things that might be more beneficial that we'd rather go after?
Of similar cost. Boy,
If they're not protruding into the approach area, what are we accomplishing?
Well, I think they give the diagram. They're recommended by MnDOT, which is why I think they give a look on the flight path there, because it doesn't, it's pretty close to
I
protruding.
mean, they're really
but
close. The one is
It's right on the edge. When you approach from over Highway 61 coming in on 3-1, they come up there.
Well, which lights, which ends are we talking about here?
Well, this is Highway 61 right here, and it's these poles.
landing to the northwest.
Yeah, if you come in for runway 3-1, you're approaching over Highway 61 coming in. I'm sorry, we're looking at other possibilities.
My comment was, seeing as it's not mandated that you have them, and apparently it's not being a safety issue so far, is there some other project that's in that realm of $10,000 to $25,000 that you'd rather pursue?
I just can't think of anything off the top of my head without, I don't think there's anything in the CIP, and they would look to the CIP first before it would have to be described in the CIP, so I just don't recall anything of that value in the CIP. I can take a peek.
Yeah, I think at this point, switching projects could potentially be difficult to do, just because I think MnDOT has kind of advanced. This is the one that, we feel is a good fit for the grant project. And, not to say it's not impossible to make a shift in, project at this point. I think it's probably, I think the major difference would just be, are they able to adjust the funding amount to account for the additional cost for the hardwire,
Yeah, I think that's what the road they should go down right now.
I don't see anything in there. The next one higher is the approach procedure survey for $75,000, but we don't even know if that needs to be done at this point in time with the FAA.
So do we need to do anything else, or just let Silas know?
I have a conference call scheduled with Silas tomorrow, just to kind of give him direction. I'll just give him direction to see if we can get that funding amount adjusted, and if MnDOT's not agreeable to adjusting it, I'll have him prepare a bid for solar lights out there that should fall under that grant threshold of $10,000.
Okay. Agenda item number 4, the PAPPYs. Any progress?
I haven't heard anything. That Silas was kind of monitoring that with MnDOT Aeronautics.
Okay.
And he had no update for me on that as well, when I talked to him this morning.
Item number 5 on the agenda, the Forest Lake Airport Commission Secretary election and volunteer assistant that we had tabled. Was the city attorney going to chime in on something, or I don't remember what the history of.
I think that's still tabled until we go through the full review. I mean, again, the conversation I had with the attorney just on the title of secretary, it's that they're not acting in the role of a traditional secretary in terms of like how some boards and commissions are established. It's more of just a title that could be easily just changed, on how it's reported, so it could be note taker, whatever. It's a name at this point, but there's no legal ramifications for changing that, and then that's her opinion on it.
All right. Move on to item 6, Hangar E drainage and gravel.
So I talked to Dave Adams, and he has delivered loads of gravel out to the hangar that has been spread around, and he hasn't received any additional calls for additional gravel. So basically, anytime we got a call for, kind of just kept delivering until the need was met. So from what I've heard, I haven't heard any other need for additional gravel out there unless I'm missing something or somebody hasn't communicated with me that there's more need, but it seems like that issue has been addressed.
I went out there after a significant, pretty good rain event, and the gravel has definitely pushed the water away more from the hangar,
Okay.
but, and it seems like there's a way for the water to drain. I think some additional correction could be made, but it's moving in the right direction.
Better than it was.
Better than it was, yeah.
Yeah, I think Dressel's still doing some stuff down there, isn't he yet?
I don't believe so. I don't know. I haven't been out there to verify, but.
Were they able to find any barricades? I know Mr. Schultz had been up here a couple of times on security concerns of getting some barricades on those driveways.
I had a conversation with Dave about barricades, about Jersey barriers. He believes that there are a few, but another idea was presented. He kind of had the idea of taking that gate and moving it to the entrance off 97. So that way there's the ditch itself, then would be probably the barricade so you couldn't get around it. And then a single Jersey barrier replaced at the entrance to the old home, the home there. So that way, just through one Jersey barrier and moving the gate back, you don't have to, that way you're not having to worry about trying to
That
have
seems
somebody.
like a good solution.
Seemed like a little easier solution. He said that it actually would be easier on them just to basically move the gates up, pop a couple holes, and then the ditch itself would provide the, prevention from driving around it.
Okay.
Are they gonna move forward with that?
I mean, I guess I was looking for, if that's the action that the commission wants, I can talk to Dave and see, when he can get that scheduled, or if there's any costs associated with that. I believe it was just staff time to get it moved. I don't think
Right.
there was, and maybe a couple days of concrete. It was fairly minimal to get that moved. It was just, looking more for direction from the commission to see if that's, because it is a little bit different than what was presented last time in terms of a security improvement out there. But when we kind of looked at it from a global level, it was kind of like we're using the land features that are already there versus trying to pile in a bunch of extra Jersey barriers and, maybe not accomplish what we're doing this way.
Those buildings will eventually be removed anyhow, so.
Right.
It adds more complicated.
And I guess we kind of came to the conclusion, if somebody really wants to get in there, they're gonna figure out a way to get in there. It just at least prevents somebody just from easily driving in and, weaving through the Jersey barriers.
Everybody in agreement that that's the right way to proceed on that? I think so. Sure.
I
Okay.
think that'd be fine.
Yeah, let them.
And on the lighting too, I know there was a number that was presented last time, I think it was around 1,250 for the estimate that came in for the lighting for the pole moves. We are confirming that. We have reached out to Excel just to verify that number. We have not heard back as to what it would cost to bring, the initial, I personally think that's a little bit low from estimates I've seen in the past for a couple of poles for Excel to come out. But we're verifying that number. We have reached out to our area rep for Excel to see if they can provide us with an estimate. But I do know that Excel is extremely busy this time of year with a lot of, projects and storm damage and whatnot. So as soon as I hear back, I'll bring an updated level or updated number on the potential for additional power out there.
Okay, thank you. Item number 7, fuel levels. Mr. Ashbeck?
According to Dave Adams, the meters are not accurate at all anymore, so I'm wondering if we should just remove this off of the agenda. I know that Dave Adams works with Brenda, and Dave gets a report when the fuel gets to a certain level, and then he goes out and dips the tanks to make sure the level is where it's at, and then they order according to that. So I think we could remove this in the future. if you're okay with that, but.
I'm fine with that if that's a better way to get it handled.
Yeah, the reason we put it on the agenda, I don't know, John, how many years ago, but it was when we were still in the old AD building.
On the other end.
With a new system, it would just gave us a chance to self-monitor. But I believe that over the last year or two, Dave and Trina, Dave and Brenda are doing,
Great
the job
work.
that needs to be done. So,
Yeah. We can remove
I'm
that from the agenda.
Fine with it being taken off the agenda, unless anybody sees any reason not to, no. Take it off the agenda. Does anybody on the commission have any other items to add, or Mr.?
I have a few items to add, and these, and again, I apologize for the last minute nature of these, this data just came in within the last 24 hours. So I did have an opportunity to get updated, the first look at what the 19 budget for the airport commission is, and I did today I was doing some number crunching on that, and just wanted, before I kind of get into the presentation on this, don't get too married to the actual detail and numbers here. This is literally, I got this information yesterday about 5 o'clock in the afternoon and started doing the number crunching today. So we could have a few of these numbers shift. Let me get my computer set up so it actually projects out here. Okay. So again, like I say here, this is just a preliminary analysis, so I haven't gone through and looked at all the 18 numbers to confirm those are accurate, and those are 19. This is basically first blush. You should get at least in the ballpark of where the airport operations budget is. Again, strictly operations, this is just the maintenance of the airport, the mowing operations, the snow removal operations, electrical bills, staff time devoted to that. This has nothing to do with any of the runway paving. This is strictly an operational budget component. When I looked at it, so we're looking at 2019, the projected revenues that we saw were 117,410. And based on the projected expenses that we saw, when I took 18s and moved them in the 19s column, we were looking at 130,835. So the 2019 projected deficit is right around 13,425 is what I'm seeing. Again, first blush, cutting numbers over and making some adjustments as needed in there. On the revenue side, there were some adjustments from 18 to 19. Overall, you're seeing about $1,000 reduction in revenue in 19 compared to 18. Most of that is due to a reduction in agricultural rent. There's been some adjustment to the amount of acreage that's been able to be farmed, so there's some reduction in ag rent that's there. That $6,500 number could change depending upon the actual numbers that are coming back. We're still waiting to see what that acreage is going to be for 19. So we kind of looked back at a good kind of ballpark estimate of where we think that revenue is going to be, and we saw approximately about a $6,500 reduction in ag rent.
So why is that the amount of land available for agriculture reduced?
Some of it has to do with with the airport paper, with the project that was there. Some of it, he hasn't been able to get back into those areas and farm those areas. So when we did 18's budget, we projected out using older numbers, so that carried over. The 18's budget wasn't adjusted, so the 6,500 is the reduction from 18 to 19. So that's what I wanted to put a number in there that's more accurate to what's going to be actually collected versus putting kind of an optimistic number in there. This is more of a conservative, probably in line with what we're actually going to see. We did see an increase in fuel sales that's tracking through the first half of 18. So I did increase fuel sale revenues by approximately $2,000. The next slide kind of goes through what the actual difference in budget impact is on that. So fuel sales did increase approximately 2,000. And in 19, the airport will be fully leased out. All lots will be leased out. So we finally have got to the point where lease revenues are coming back in. So there is an increase, even with the reduction in base lot rent based on the CIP reduction. You are seeing an increase in lease payments of approximately $3,300. So that's incorporated in the revenue side. On the expenses side, approximately $4,000 in increase in expenses. Some of that's is a slight increase in the wages and benefits that we charge. So when staff time does work out at the airport, we charge that money back to the airport fund. Approximately $1,600 change there. Again, that number could change up or down a little bit depending upon when I actually go through and make sure those numbers are accurate. But that's based on 18's number, bringing that over to 19. I also had to increase the motor fuel cost because if we're selling more gas, we have to buy more gas. So we had to increase that by $1,700. Basically, rough number, when you look at what the airport collects on a gallon of fuel, $1 of fuel sales, it's approximately 15 cents. That can kind of go up and down a little bit when we average our price out. We try to set the price of nav gas so it's competitive with other airports, so we're not way out of the range, way low. So when we kind of looked at averages, what we kind of get for nav gas, it's approximately 15 cents a gallon. So you're seeing if you increase your nav gas sales by $2,000, you're really only netting about $300 difference in revenues there. Insurance increase, there's some insurance increase of about $700 there. And then every other item in the budget, I basically just brought it over with a 0%. When I looked at it, gave it the first cut, everything seemed to be tracking that we'd be in line to meet 18's budget. Had a quick conversation with Dave Adams this afternoon just to verify, since he does a lot of the coding, and he said, no, everything seems to be in line on those other items, so he was fairly confident with a 0% increase. And I also moved forward the $32,000 contribution to capital improvement. Now, the capital improvement includes if, the cost share that the airport commission would have on a MnDOT funded project, so that 10% comes out of that $32,000. There's also money in there that was set up to be put aside for when the runway needs maintenance down the road, a seal coat, or, mill and overlay. That money is available there to fund that project. So that $32,000 was moved forward. So some of that basically is to allow for capital campaign or capital projects to happen in 19. So when you kind of look at the difference, to try to balance out the revenues versus expenses, you're looking at having at this point, first cut is reduce their budget by approximately $13,000. One option would be to reduce that capital, the amount that's basically earmarked for capital improvement projects for 19 by that $13,000. That being said, that would reduce the amount that's contributed towards the runway maintenance. So in essence, it's kind of deferring some of those expenses down the road instead of building up that fund balance. So when that expenses comes forward, you have the funds available to do that. Or it would also reduce what would be allowed for capital. Basically the CIP in 19, you'd have to really examine, maybe take some projects off that list because the funding just wouldn't be there in 19. So if you reduce that $32,000 by that $1345, you're looking at approximately $18,500 that would go into that capital improvement fund going into next year. Obviously, you could also try to figure out a way to increase revenues, to cover operations. As an example, if you wanted to do fuel sale increase to cover that deficit, based on that 15% profit margin, you would need to increase fuel sales by approximately $90,000. So you're looking at almost tripling fuel sales to cover up that operating budget deficit. Is it realistic to triple fuel sales out there? Probably not. So I just wanted to put that in there as the example because I know in the past I've always heard, well, we can just sell more gas, which definitely brings increased revenues into the airport, but it's probably not at the level, I wanted to put a real world example of when you see that type of deficit, just how much you need to increase fuel
But
sales.
when we're gonna have double the hangars out there that are occupied and used, I would think we'd see a good increase anyway, but
Right, and
obviously,
again,
probably
it's-
not triple.
And that's the thing. So I mean, that 13,000 may seem, as like, oh, it's an attainable number with extra fuel sales. But when you actually look at what actually goes in the revenue side, once you get the expenses out, you need to do quite a bit more fuel sales out. And that being said, you could have significant increase in activity, significant increase in fuel sales, and you could meet it there. I would not use a projection of increased fuel sales to balance the budget because I just don't think that's going to be attainable. I mean, I think a conservative estimate in there is probably the way to go, on that one, because you put an optimistic fuel sale in there and all of a sudden halfway through the year, you're not meeting that goal, then you have to try to figure out where you can make
Right.
the adjustment on the expense side.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
The question I had as it relates to fuel sales is, when Ellie Pulseth was here, I remember her saying that there was a chance to save a 0.5% or 1% of our cost per transaction if we went from the phone connection to the TCP/IP connection. I know that the company that we use now finally has got the equipment where we could go to TCP/IP. And it would eliminate a phone line and we could use use the internet that we already have there. So I just don't know the cost that it would take to get to that, because it does mean a new terminal.
Yeah, and I think that's the main barrier at this point. The cost of the terminal, I mean, if and again, don't hold me to this number, when I look back at them a couple of years ago, I want to say a new terminal with install was in the ballpark of 50,000 plus or minus, because the terminals themselves, so again, you'd have to, you know, I mean, unless we're doing, you know, thousands of gallons a day to
Doesn't
make up
make
that
sense.
difference, you know, it's gonna be tough. And the other thing too is, you could see projections go, and all of a sudden, if Navgas hits a certain price and people aren't flying as much, that revenue could go down pretty significantly. And if you're banking on that to cover operations, you all of a sudden have a pretty significant deficit to try to make up mid-year, which could be difficult.
Right.
So that's just kind of the first cut of the budget, just kind of wanted to give you an idea. I'm gonna go back now and really start to refine those numbers and really start to dive in to see, you know, where it could be. But just kind of wanted to say, first cut, airport right now, revenues are not matching up to expenses, you know, especially if you're looking at trying to make sure that you're maintaining a fund balance to account for future maintenance needs.
And on the future maintenance needs on the CIP projects and those things, generally MinDOT covers 90% of those, we cover 10%. Is that the ratio?
Correct, but you know, and I think that's a good question to ask, and I think when you're looking at setting it up long-term, you know, you could potentially always hope that you get 90-10 funding on a maintenance project on a runway.
Yeah.
However, if that year that project doesn't rise to the top, that work still needs to get performed out there. If all of a sudden we still need to do a significant maintenance project out there, just because the grant funds aren't there doesn't mean that project goes away. That project will still need to get completed. And you'd want to at least have funds available to cover that. And then if in the year that project is due, MnDOT says, yeah, we're going to fund this 90-10, all of a sudden you have a fund balance that could go to other projects out there. You know, because basically one thing, if you kind of look at this kind of long-term growth, is that you've, in essence, maximized your revenue side, you know, with you're fully leased out, you know, so the lease revenue is basically there. Now it's just going to go up by CIP increases. Your other option is basically fuel sales at this point for your revenue. And, you know, if you expand out to do another expansion, you know, there's no funding and basically there to basically help to fund that infrastructure improvement. So you're kind of in this area right now where we don't really have another solid revenue stream to basically come in to, you know, support a lot of increased activity. You know, I'm not saying you can't just do kind of more lights on budget, kind of keep it status quo. You could, you know, through, you know, if you get money kind of saved and build some fund balance up, you would have money available to do CIP improvement, to keep the maintenance going, to keep that operation going. It just wouldn't be the time of the year where you want to come forward and bring, you know, significant projects forward, just because, you know, you don't have one that I've seen in the wings that would generate enough revenue to basically pay for itself. Like the T hangar would probably operate at a loss, which again isn't going to bring enough revenue in to justify the expense.
Half the deficit of $425, roughly half of that is loss of agriculture, $6,500, roughly half. Are we going to gain that again back next year? Are there plans to do that? Because I'm loath to lose that agriculture revenue.
Right, and again, don't hold that 6,500. That was kind of a ballpark number. We're going to get that adjustment back. You know, we'll get the actual number there. Some of that could come back, you know, we'll see. I know some of that with the area being wet out there, they had difficulty getting equipment in there. So there was some conversation of, let's reduce, I can't farm the original, you know, leased area because of the fact that it's, you know, it's been impacted by that design equipment wise. And I'll get a firm number for that, but you're right. I mean, that most of that deficit
right
is
there, yeah.
loss of revenue. But again, you know, when you look at with that improvement that happened out there, that did change how that area was farmed, you know, for lack of a better term, and had impact on revenues, you know, and that was, if you look back at the notes, there was some conversation too, like anytime an expansion project comes out, so if you expand the airport to do additional hangar spaces, you're potentially eating into that airport, the ag revenue even more, so then you have to do the math of, does the expansion, the revenues I'm gonna get from the expansion, is it more than I'm gonna get on an ag rent? You know, so I mean, you have limited revenue streams here, and that's just kind of want to make sure that, you know, the commission's aware of that. We've kind of got to the point where we've always been kind of saying, well, when we build out, well, we're built out now, and this is kind of the revenue picture at this
So
point.
we could, on the north end, if we removed a couple of the old buildings, which need to be removed at some point in time, and cleaned up the north end, we could probably gain back I don't know, maybe 5 acres, you know.
Potentially.
Potentially.
But then again, you have to look at what's the cost of removing those, and if there's any type of soil correction to be done, is it even farmable? I mean, there's a lot of kind of what ifs to that, but that is a possibility to try to recoup some of that, lost egg rent that's out there.
Dan, is any of that land where that bank of soil that was partially removed to augment the runway project, is any of that farmable or?
That I don't know. I have to go back and pull the actual maps that we're using for the lease. I didn't have time today to go back in and take a look at,
So what you're saying is the pile that was there that's no longer
They
there,
are
is that land
farming
being
that. I
farmed?
mean, that has expanded down on that end. I mean, that's got a good corn crop in there now.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that that's included. in-
Right, yeah, and that's gonna be audited. We'll make sure that those numbers, and again, like, that's why I said, I just kind of, with that rent reduction in there, I just kind of threw a number in there that seemed to be more realistic to what we're probably gonna see. I could have probably shot a little bit low and we could make an adjustment up, but I just kind of wanted to present the more conservative, probably realistic budget.
And then the other question I have, with the current hardtop runway, is there any opportunity to have more farmable land, what used to be the grass runway?
Possible. I mean, I had a conversation this afternoon just, on the mowing requirements out there. And, if you shrink back kind of what's getting mowed and potentially turn that into, if they could turn it into, if it's available for hay, that could be an opportunity to say, maybe you're not getting the full what you get for cropland, but you're getting something back.
But at least you'd be gaining something.
Correct.
And that was my point about haying those areas that we could take and bring online if the buildings were removed. It could be for hay, and then the big benefit is you don't have the expense that's being spent to maintain it.
And I'd have to verify. I mean, I mean, I've been on a tractor a few times in my life, but I'm not an expert in terms of how, agribusiness. So I mean, I would want to verify that that would be even a possibility for hay before I say.
I'm
that.
just thinking we could save two ways. One, you obviously get some ag rent for whatever you do, hay or whatever you're gonna put there. And then the other side of the coin would be you don't have to send people out there to cut grass that you're not using.
Correct, and that would reduce some of the maintenance costs that are seen out there. So you could potentially see some maintenance savings in there. However, when you look at maintenance savings, it's almost a wash in terms of the maintenance is reimbursed by MnDOT, so there is a cost. So it's all kind of this, checks and balances. You reduce your maintenance costs too much, and your MnDOT revenues come in, so you're kind of in this, But you're right, if we're going over what MnDOT's reimbursing to mow that, and you reduce that mowing expense, it could be an overall savings there, so you could see a couple of cost savings there as well. That's the type of stuff I'm hoping to accomplish before the next meeting, so I can kind of get some of those options on the table. But, right now, I just, when I first looked at the number, I just want to make everybody aware that it's looking like some reductions or some adjustments in the budget for 19 is going to need to happen, because at this point, the budget as presented just would not be sustainable long-term, just because you're running in the red every year. And, revenues, unless we get really creative, are going to be pretty much, we're at the flatline point at this point.
Dan,
Yeah, go ahead.
Dan, does this, do these numbers include the increased funding by MnDOT for our maintenance each year? So that was going to go up since.
Yeah, it does, yep, yeah, so that's actually, 19's numbers was the same as 18, so we just transferred that over, so it's like approximately 18,000 and change that we get reimbursed for the maintenance side of it, and that is included in that figure calculation, so. And again, I'm gonna go back and verify that everything that's, in here, this is again, me kind of running around the day making phone calls and crunching numbers and spreadsheets and, calculations and everything, so I'll make sure I double check everything before it's finalized.
Any other budget questions for Mr. Undum? No? Dan, did you have something else you wanted?
And just on the budget side too, just a reminder that lease payments were due July 1st. I know there's a few that have not paid lease payments for for this year's rent from the last rent cycle. So if those are withstanding, get those in, because second letters were sent out, and we'll continue to pursue those excess lease payments that are owed in. And I have one final update. While I was out of the office, MnDOT actually reached out and they wanted to have a meeting, a staff level meeting with some of the MnDOT staff and city staff, just to kind of discuss some of the issues at the airport. It was basically kind of, let's figure out aeronautical use guidelines, let's figure out kind of what's going on, kind of have a meeting at a staff level. So I have that on my calendar. I also have the city attorney present, because MnDOT, they're bringing counsel, and typically if you go into a meeting with the opposing counsel, you want your own counsel there, just to, and it's more of an informative thing. She wants to just get the tone of the meeting to see what kind of happens in there. And then I also reached out to Bolton and Mink, they are sending an airport engineer as well, just because, you know, again, if they get into the technical weeds of airport engineering guidelines or whatever, I wanted that expertise of that. So that meeting is scheduled for the end of this month. They'll be out here for, I think it's about a 3-hour meeting we have scheduled to kind of go through, you know, what's going on, you know, what can we do, you know, just kind of, you know, and I do know part of that discussion is aeronautical use guidelines out at the airport and just making sure, you know, they've offered some, you know, we want to offer some help on that. So having that first conversation there with MnDOT, and I'll report back kind of, you know, what the fruits of that meeting are at the next airport commission meeting, but just wanted the commission to be aware that that meeting is going to happen, I believe at the end of July. They wanted to do it right before the 4th of July, but I was out of the country and I couldn't fly back in time to make it, so I said, well, we'll go for the end of July. So
Okay.
we do have a meeting on the schedule there.
Okay. Anything else? on your
That is it, unless there's any questions for me on anything, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Well, we all received a letter that you received back in March about illegal operations out here that might affect the funding of our airport by the DOT. What's happening with that?
That's-
It's 4 months into the thing, and I haven't heard a thing about.
That's gonna be discussed at the July 30th meeting. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, that's part of the conversation. So we do have a meeting, you know, that's part of that meeting on the end of the month. We'll have that conversation.
I'd hate to see the funding stop
Yeah, in,
for something like this.
correct, and that's part of that conversation. I mean, we just wanna make sure, and again, the tone when the meeting was set was, you know, more of a, let's, you know, come together at a staff level and figure out kind of the scope, what's going on. That's definitely on the, you know, we don't have a formal agenda at this point, but that is a point that will be, you know, discussed, because that letter was sent, and we'll, you know, have an opportunity at that point to discuss it.
Anything from the floor this evening? Anyone? No? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
I have a motion from Mr. Ashbeck. Second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.